Are we live?
Yes. Go. Yeah. You
Okay,
are live.
Well, maybe we should sit down and get started here.
I'm going to use my phone here for a
I
time.
love that every live video is just rolling. Louder?
Louder.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yep, we're not quite ready.
Why are you sideways?
Still working out. We got the toaster oven going off over here.
Toast is ready.
During the last video, we had several phones dinging. Who was that?
Star Stevens. Rebecca Hardy.
Somebody's lots of finger pointing going on back here. And my cameraman is eating breakfast.
I gotta eat too.
Y'all are a little hard on him. I'll tell you what. He's the best.
Why is it failing?
Don't set
Why
the
is
bar
my
too
broadcast
high.
failing?
Well, I can only assume we're being. Don't give some expectations, huh?
Yeah, he's gonna
Let's use
expect
your
food and all
phone
sorts of
for your
stuff for his services.
Probably on my desk. Okay, for some reason now it's failing.
So
you
we
guys
are
just get started.
we are live on YouTube
And Instagram.
And hopefully we're going to be live on Facebook in just a minute. So we're just gonna hang tight here. Ready? I really wish I had a phone to show this angle. If you can
Noah, come
see
take a picture of this.
what is going on the other side over here. This looks very good. I can actually see. I like this setup.
All right, what am I taking a photo of?
This.
Right here? I can do that. Yeah.
What they see this
What
way.
they see.
Oh, what they see?
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, no pressure. Just like 10 cameras in your face.
You are being live streamed, just so you know. Just so informed consent. We like informed
Mom, I'm the
consent.
cameraman. Like, I kind of set this up. Like, I know what I'm getting into. So, just right here.
Just no F-bombs is what she said.
That's right.
Well, I'm a curse. Only a little.
I just.
It's okay. I've got it here. I'm just gonna do it here.
Do you want to use my iPad as like the proper upper?
No, I'm just gonna hold it.
All right, one of those is
You
going to be
are.
good.
All right, if you're with us on Instagram or YouTube, just bear with us one more minute here while we get Facebook up and going.
Okay, I gotta stand there. No, you're not gonna be able to hold it.
She's got it.
Okay, I'll figure it out.
She is good. Apparently, we're having a tripod shortage. Okay, are we rolling?
Yes.
Are we on Facebook?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Welcome, friends, on all the social media platforms. Jackie Schlegel, Texas for Vaccine Choice, here in the headquarters, our new headquarters that we are going to showcase tonight. We are so excited to welcome an incredibly special guest, a friend in this fight, somebody we just adore you, Senator Bob Hall. Thank you so much for being here. Everywhere I go, it doesn't matter what event I'm at, somebody will say, the conversation will come up as far as the upcoming legislative session. And they say, who's on our side? Who's going to fight? And there's one name, I'm not kidding you, one name that comes up at every single event, whether it is a homeschooling event, a Republican event, a medical freedom event, and it is Senator Bob Hall. So truly, we're just so thankful for you and your service to the state of Texas. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. I'm not doing what I don't think anybody else ought to be doing. I mean, this is a service job. I'm truly humbled and blessed that God led me to do this, and it's different than what I thought it was going to be when I got into it.
Did you think you were going to be the lone man, really, on a lot of issues?
Well, it wasn't always that way. I had some friends down there until election time that I lost 3 of them, and it kind of made me the Marcus Luttrell of the right, the lone survivor.
Yeah.
And that makes it a little different. But it's the non-legislative service work that I did not really comprehend how important it is. I did not realize the problems that people have just dealing with state agencies, the heartache and money that people spend just because when someone from the government shows up and says you have to do this or you can't do that, kind of thing. We spend more time helping people deal with state agencies than we do working on legislation. And it's stuff that is life changing for a lot of people.
Absolutely. As a parent of a special needs child, I can tell you even right now, even in this office with my friends, they are blown away by how much red tape there is just, dealing with the government agencies in my daughter's care. I can imagine right now during this COVID crisis with the closures and the shutdowns in the nursing homes, I can imagine you've been incredibly busy. So tell us about the last few months for you and what life has been like.
It's been far busier than I thought it was going to be, particularly since I decided or realized very early on that we were overstating the COVID issue, and that the actions we're taking, once I started talking to doctors who really understood what was happening and were not part of the government, that we were on a path that our cure was going to be worse than the disease.
And you knew that very early.
I asked that question the second week that we had our legislative hearings on, our phone call, and I asked the question, who's following the other curve? Because remember, early on, they started out by telling us that this was one of the most deadly virus we've ever seen, probably a 7% death rate. We would have 250,000 Texans dead by August. Our hospitals would be overrun. People would be dying in the hallways, dying at home, couldn't get in the hospitals, and our medical community would be overwhelmed. We didn't have the equipment to handle them, and there were no medications that were effective for it, period. And so basically what the government did was convince people if they stuck their head outside their door, they would, without a mask on, they would get the COVID. And if they got the COVID, they were going to die. Now that we're several months, I guess almost 9 months into this thing now, we have found that everything that was said that led to that first 2-week shutdown was a lie. It was an outright lie. We didn't have 250,000 Texans dead in August. We'll never see that number. We never overran our hospitals. Matter of fact, they didn't even come close to having the facilities used. As a matter of fact, we ended up with more medical problems with people that did not have the COVID that were refused access to the hospitals for several weeks while we waited for the COVID patient to not show up. I mean, think about the women who just discovered they had stage 1 breast cancer, were going to have surgery, and were told, nope, we can't do that. Come back sometime later, and maybe we can do it. People that had malignant carcinomas that could not be removed, cataracts that could not be removed, simple dental surgery that could not be done. People with heart problems that did not get the medications or see the doctor that need to be done. We backed up people so badly that last month, Texas was ranked #1 in the nation in the increase in deaths non-COVID related. #1 in the nation over that because of the medical treatments they could not get or would not get because they were afraid. The government and media scared them so badly they would not go to the doctors and get the treatments they needed. And I felt that for people that got cancer that couldn't get the surgery. I mean, I don't have to tell y'all how important it is for early treatment. And then we back up and look at what was being done in that this was declared a disaster. It was a medical disaster. This was not a hurricane. This was not a fire. This was not a tornado. This was a disease, a medical disaster. But our medical community was excluded from the plan of something to do about it. You think about it, the strategy was 100% defense. There was nothing done to address eliminating the COVID. It was all wear the mask, social distancing, lockdown, and hope the COVID goes away. Ask the question, how long is this going to be? We don't know. What's the exit criteria? We don't have one. Never. We have never heard, no one has ever stated an exit criteria. Yet we're down now to a few deaths a day. And if you take a look at the curve of infections and deaths of this virus, it's identical to every other virus we've ever had. We will continue to have cases. And the older the virus gets, the weaker it gets. And we're seeing that more people are being infected, but they aren't getting sick. They aren't getting sick. Now, people are dying. But if you take a look at what CDC themselves have said, 94% of the people that have died that were tagged with COVID actually died of liver failure, heart failure, cancer, you name it, something else. They did not die because of the COVID. They died of comorbidities, only 6% of the people. And then you take a look at the other statistic that CDC themselves said also, that of those people who have been infected with the COVID, 85% said they wore a mask either all the time or most of the time, which would tell you that if you don't wear a mask, or if you wear a mask, you're 6 times more likely to get the COVID than if you don't wear one. And when you talk to people who really understand the mask, like the OSHA professionals that I've interviewed, had the Zoom meetings with, whose job is to provide environmental protection equipment in the workplace for people from everything from coal mines to operating rooms. They absolutely denounce this policy, just like Dr. Fauci did, and I didn't mispronounce that, it's Dr. Fauci, did when he first came out and said masks are worthless. And he's right. He was right. That was the one thing he said that was absolutely right. And it doesn't take, I'm an engineer, I'm not a doctor, but I've spent a lot of time with doctors lately. And when they talk about the size of the virus and the size of the porousness of the mask, particularly the cloth mask, and even the medical mask, the virus is so tiny and the holes are so big. The analogy I would use is it's like trying to use a mask to stop that virus is if you tried to make a water bucket using chicken wire and thought you could carry water in it because it goes right through. And the mask also give people a false sense of security because they think, I'm wearing a mask, I'm okay, I don't have to wash my hands. Well, washing the hands is one thing that actually is the best thing to do, is to keep your hands clean. To put hand sanitizer on as soon as when you get out of the car, put it on your hands. That gives you a level of protection while you're in the store. And when you come back to the car, first thing you do is use a hand sanitizer because the doctors say that the virus is more transmitted from touching surfaces, hard surfaces, metal, glass, ceramic, that kind of thing. And what people will do wearing a mask, because they can't help themselves, is they touch the surface and they adjust the mask. Well, when they do that, they're actually transporting that virus from that hard surface, putting it on the outside of their mask, in which this tiny little thing with all these great big holes, and somebody breathes in, and then so they're sucking the virus right in. Plus, what you're doing to yourself by wearing a mask for long periods of time. Remember, your breath, when you exhale, that's one of your body's waste ports. Now, I have some rather good descriptions I sometimes use to explain you won't do that with other waste ports in your body, but you're there holding this thing in and sucking the viral back in. So if you had a minor infection, you're going to have a worse infection. And I just did an interview last night with about 12 parents with school-age kids that had experienced problems with masks in schools and so on, and what they were having, what they were experiencing, and the psychological impact that it's having on the kids. They told me that last month, in a 7-day period, they had 5 suicides in their school district.
This is horrifying.
I was told, I have not verified this yet, I'm working on it, because I went looking for the information when I first heard about this. It's hard to get. But I had someone who was investigating it told me that at one of our universities last year, they had 5 suicides last year. So far this year, they've had 51. I need to verify that, but I do know that down in Montgomery County, they had 4 suicides in a weekend down there. And I've talked to a couple of sheriffs, and they said their attempted suicides are through the roof. They get at least a call a day on an attempted suicide by a teenager or younger. And so we have a serious problem with what we're doing, not to mention the problems with infections breaking out on the face, thrush mouth, cancer sores, canker sores in the mouth. And we're now seeing even staph infections behind the ears because of the rubber with the kids.
Now, where can we find this content? I would be very interested.
It will be on my Facebook
Okay.
page, probably the first of the week. We'll have that. One of the mothers talked about her son who was in a swimming program, managed to get on a swimming team. When they go to the building where the pool is, they have to wear a mask once they enter the door. They sit socially separated by 10 feet with a mask on. They wear the mask right up to the starting blocks. When they step into the starting blocks, they take the mask off, put it in a Ziploc bag, put it in their bathing suit, and then race. And when they're finished, they have to have the mask on by the time they get out of the pool. Here these kids are huffing and puffing and can hardly breathe, and they're having to breathe through a mask, which is now wet. And so I am surprised we have not had more problems. But that's just a couple of the problems.
Who in the state of Texas, because you're talking to the doctors, you've been very public and you've put together live streams and panels, and you've been out in the community, you're talking to those who are treating COVID. So that's a very different response and message and feedback that those doctors are giving you from the response of our government agencies. But you're in contact with both. You're on both sides of this. What is going on here?
Well, on the government side, we have no real doctors. They may have gotten a degree 50 years ago, 40 years ago, but they haven't been in a clinic. They're bureaucrats.
Okay.
They're bureaucrats that are shuffling papers. They have no real world experience. The governor has had no advice from any real doctors out there. And he has said there were 4 doctors he took advice from: Dr. Falsey, Burks, Hellerstadt, which is Health and Human Services, and this McClellan. McClellan works for the pharmaceutical companies. He's been an administrator. Hellerstadt, nice guy, means well, but he has no experience. He's been an administrator for the last. He hasn't been in a clinic. I don't think he would know which end of the thermometer to use or where to put it. And what has come out is what will really prevent people from getting sick is, it's no surprise, it's their own immune system. One of the reasons that why you have people that are in the nursing homes that are susceptible, they have very low immune system, or they have comorbidities that pull it down. Young people that happen to get it, they are going to have a very low immune system. Well, this was obvious early on, and I raised the question with our Health and Human Services folks in a phone call. I said, if we're saying at this point they were still not buying that there are any medicines out there, so if they're not, why aren't we putting out information to folks to encourage them to build up their immune system? We know that things like vitamin A and D and C and E and lysine, all these, this is before we learned about zinc, that they will help build an immune system that would help fight this. They literally laughed at me on the phone. So we don't do that kind of thing. Yeah, it was sad. And then, of course, we learned that hydroxychloroquine, and on there, I know you have seen it. I did an after the first set of doctors, when people responded to that interview I did with those 6, 7 doctors, they kept saying, well, where's the data? Where's the data? So the following week, I said, I'll show them some data. So it was very impromptu. I had seen, I knew where it was. So I called it, I got it up. I didn't have time to create slides. So I just printed it out and pasted it on some cardboard and did a little cut and paste of charts that showed worldwide that those countries that had allowed the use of hydroxychloroquine, their death rate was 1/10 of what those countries that did not allow its use. And it showed that even countries like in South America, Costa Rica, and there was one other one down there, the government down there actually was going door to door, handing out hydroxychloroquine, erythromycin, and zinc to the people free of charge. Little brown sack. That's in an average country, it's probably about $20 worth. And so the one other thing, and I think we're probably about to run out of time.
No, we're good. We
Okay.
still have time, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the other thing that bothered me was, and it's amazing how God puts you in the right way. Nothing happens by accident. Absolutely. And so Kay and I she contracted the shingles right after this started. So I took her to the doctor, and it happened to be Yvette Lozano. I think you know Dr. Lozano. And so during the course of figuring out what Kay had was the shingles, which was a surprise, she was telling me about the problem she was having with hydroxychloroquine, that the pharmacies would not fill it, were not filling their prescriptions anymore. And I verified that yeah, they had put out an order stopping it now. And so I made a phone call to the pharmacy board, arranged to have a phone call the following Tuesday with them to understand what they had done. And they said, yeah, we're afraid that there would be a run on it if people started using it for the COVID, and those folks with rheumatoid arthritis and lupus would not be able to get it for there. So we put a stop on it. I said, but we have an abundant supply.
Yes.
That doesn't make sense to me. What about rationing or limiting something? No. I said, okay, well, let me give you two scenarios that you're going to be faced with. The first one is, what are you going to tell the governor to tell the people about 6 months from now when we learn that other states that had not prohibited the use of hydroxy, and doctors in Texas that managed to get it treated patients, and they had a very high survival rate, and we had a very high death rate. What do you tell the governor, tell the parents or the families of those people who died, that they died because they couldn't get the hydroxychloroquine? How does he explain that to them? And I said, while you're thinking about that one, here's the other scenario. In about the same time frame, the whistleblowers come forth, bring the emails and the letters that shows there's collusion between the pharmacy companies and the state pharmacy boards to tamp down the use of any existing medications while the pharmacies developed a new expensive drug. Yet we had lots of people that died, the same number. How do you explain that one? And he said, well, let us talk it over. And I said, and I'm not, I'm not very pushy. I'm really not. And I said, okay, you guys can talk all you want, but I said, I want to know by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, what are you going to do to fix this problem? So 8:45, they called and said, what we're going to do is we're going to change the restriction to a one-time prescription of a 2-week supply. And I said, that's fine. That's a reasonable thing to do, because that's more than enough. They only needed a week. And so that was more than enough. So we got the pharmacy board fixed. And then the next thing you know is I get called my doctors, Dr. Stella Emanuel from down in Houston, Dr. Richard Urso, Bartlett. They're now being harassed and investigated by the Texas Medical Board. And so I said, this is just an off-label, what we call using an FDA approved medication for something other than what it's approved for is called off-label use of it. The main thing of it being approved is the safety of it. It's the safety of the medication is more important than the effectiveness, because we have a lot of medications that aren't very effective, but they're safe and they do something. They may be 20% effective. Like vaccines, some of them are only 6% effective, but they declare them safe. But that's a whole other issue. But on this, with that, so this is a common problem. In fact, it is so common that the guidelines for Medicare that doctors have to follow will quite often, they will have 3 choices or three treatments, but they have to take them in order, A, B, and C. If you're diagnosed with something, then the doctor is required to treat you with A. And if it doesn't work, then they can go to B. If B doesn't work, they can go to C. Well, generally C is the most expensive one. Quite often, about 30% of the time, 20-30% of the time, A is the off-label use of a medication for that. So it is not unusual for that to happen. And so, but anyway, I wrote a letter to the Texas Medical Board and pointed out to them that what they were doing was interfering with doctors treating their patients, and that the countries that had used hydroxychloroquine had a death rate of about 10% of what we had. And which means that 90% of the people that had died in Texas, their blood was on their hands.
Yeah.
And while we couldn't do anything about that, they could do something about the next 10,000 in there. And so when I sent him that letter, I don't know, somehow we got out to the media and they tweeted something on it. And so the chairman of the commission quickly tweeted out, "Oh, we never stood in the way. Doctors are free to use hydroxychloroquine. It's up to them. It's between them and their patient," and so on. And I thought, that's great. He's got it out there in writing. Well, the next day, Senator Colcourse called me and said she was going to have a meeting with the Texas Medical Board. What did I want her to tell them, ask them? And I said, tell them that major state agencies do not run their operation with tweets. They do it with directives. And sure enough, they put out a formal statement saying that doctors were free to make their own choice.
Wow.
Now,
that was a huge victory.
No, that was a big victory. Now, the one I skipped over was early on when they closed the hospitals, and I realized what was happening. I wrote out a letter saying, "Hey, we're causing more illnesses and deaths by having our hospital shut down." Because I was getting calls from the hospitals, we're laying people off. We don't have enough people in here. Our beds are empty. We had hospitals that went out of business. That closure of the hospitals actually reduced our hospital capacity. It reduced it. And but that's one that I did manage to get the other senators to join with me. And then we sent another letter that got that brought to an end. And so we had three major things there that we were able to do by just speaking out and being aggressive. Because as a senator, I had no power to do anything. But we
Well,
did.
you've done a whole lot, all things considering. And I do have a question as far as the politics of COVID, because you have witnessed it. I mean, I'm hearing two very distinct messages from you as far as one of hope in treatments, and we can save our economy and get people back to work, and we can learn to live with this virus. And then there seems to be a lot of, the other side, the doom and gloom. And we've not only seen that play out through the COVID response, I'm curious at how it's become so political, but how has that how did it affect our elections, and how is it going to affect our upcoming legislative session? I really want to hit on those two things, on the election and the upcoming legislative session.
Okay. On the election, the people's reaction was pretty well divided along party lines. But let me say one thing about the people in this and the government. While I have been very disappointed in the way we have handled it from a government standpoint of the extreme shutdown, lockdown, all of what we did, upset with that, I am more so disappointed in the people in general, in how they have so readily accepted whatever the government and the media has said, which has still half the people out there believing that if they stick their head out of their front door without a mask on, they're going to get the COVID, and if they get COVID, they're going to die, which is an absolute lie. And we're living in fear. Everybody's making their decisions based on fear. And that drove what we did in the elections by the idea of we had to have mail-in ballots because people should, that's like I said, hey, That makes no sense. I said, if people are afraid to go vote, put the machines in Walmart because they have no problem, you
Going
know,
to Walmart,
finding
absolutely,
themselves
it's tax.
between two big fat
Yes.
sweaty people wrestling for the last leg of chicken in the place. And so just put the machines there, and but it did, and so it set us up for an incredible amount of voter fraud that we
Sure.
experienced. In Texas, though, what I do feel good about is, in spite of all the money that the Democrats spent, I spent us about 2-1,
Yeah,
and all the fraud that we know about. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, it was huge fraud. We still managed to get 6% victory at the presidential level. We maintained the state. Remember, they're going to go after the House.
yes.
We maintained the House. There was no reduction there. And interesting enough, the seats that we maintained there, people like Tony Tinderholt, Morgan Myers, Matt Shaheen, Jeff Leach, and Button.
Champions for Texans for vaccine choice.
In there.
People we rely on.
These were all people in slightly blue districts, which said that Texas rejects the blue. In fact, my bottom line statement is the message out of this last election is Texans stood up and said, we are red and we want to be bright red. Because if you go take and we're doing it without making our tent bigger. You know, we have those people who think the Republicans need to move to the middle or to the left, make the tent bigger, bring in more people to vote. And I've said, no, we need to get people to understand how much better their life is with the opportunities of individual liberty and choice that they have with the conservative Republican policies. Well, we go down to the Rio Grande Valley. It doesn't get any bluer than the Rio Grande Valley. 4 years ago, Hillary beat Trump by over 20 points in that district. Pete Flores, our Republican senator, just barely lost his election by only 3 points. That meant that there was a huge Latino vote that came over. We know there was a huge black vote that came over. The statewide election for a railroad commissioner. Now, you know, railroad commissioner is oil and gas. That's what it's on. Tons of money were put into that race. Won that handily because people don't want our oil and gas business messed with. And so we had every aspect of what we did was clearly people want to move to the right.
Yeah.
And then the influence of it was the COVID with the mail-in ballots. We still have problems. Hopefully it accentuated the need to have what was last time SB 9 that Brian Hughes and I carried. It was his bill. I joint authored it with him to have election reform. And we've got to have that. We have got
So I also want to point out that the Republican Party of Texas has even stronger language for informed consent in its recent platform, which was a
Yes.
huge win. More and more Texans are stepping up, to your point, and saying we believe in individual liberty, we believe in medical freedom, we believe in the doctor-patient relationship. And all of this goes hand in hand and hopefully sets us up for a better legislative session. Up until the last week or so, I'm still a little concerned about legislative session. Is the building going to be open? Are we going to be allowed in? As a constituent, as a citizen, am I going to be able to advocate for my cause? What direction are we headed?
That's a real good question. And right now, as you know, the Capitol is closed. It's been closed since June. There is no plan to reopen it. It's not closed because of COVID. It's closed because of the fear of Antifa. We have shut down with the fear of Antifa. Then you lay on top of that the fear that still is in many people out there that haven't got the word or understanding that we don't need to fear it. I mean, until we can get the word out there for people that they will just simply take the medications that are available out there, you can ignore this thing completely. And the doctors I've been working with have made it abundantly clear. It's been demonstrated worldwide in hundreds of thousands of cases. Simple hydroxychloroquine, erythromycin, and zinc sulfate are where your chances, and right now, even without that, your chances of survival are 99.998%.
So you are not holding out for the vaccine. You're not putting.
We don't need a vaccine. The prophylactics that we have now are far more effective than any vaccine we've ever had for anything.
So why are we hearing this message, especially from our governor, who has basically said life will resume back to normal when a vaccine hits the market? How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't like it at all, but it concerns me how that message is not just universal throughout the United States, it's throughout the world in most countries. And so there is a strong force that is behind what this is, because there was no reason for us to ever have anything more than a short shutdown while we figured out what was going on. There was no reason for the Washington medical community to turn on one of the safest medications that there is. Hydroxychloroquine has been around for 65 years. There are only about 50 deaths that you can link to hydroxychloroquine, and they occurred 50 years ago when they decided that a bigger dose, it's the typical thing, if an ounce works, let's give them a pound. And they tried that and said, oh, wait a minute, a big dose doesn't work. And then when we had those gosh awful studies that were done, or why did the Lancet publish the study right after, let me back up to so people put it in perspective how it became tainted. And then they hung on to the taint of something that would have prevented most of the deaths, 90% of them. We wouldn't have had to have the shutdowns. We wouldn't have to have the schools closed. None of this would have had to happen. But they issued a temporary emergency use order for hydroxychloroquine, which they did not need to do. It was okay for doctors to use it, but they issued that. And then the Lancet published this study that showed, oh my gosh, you use hydroxychloroquine, it kills people. It doesn't work, kills people, it's bad. Well, some very smart doctors quickly took that study apart. And not only was it wasn't just a bad study, it wasn't just bad data, it was a total fraud, total created fraud. And so the Lancet had to withdraw the study. But before they did that, the CDC withdrew their emergency authorization use, which left a cloud over the use of hydroxychloroquine. And that has remained with us. And then all the other agencies have picked it up. Oh, you kill people. You still listen to it in the news today. There are more people die with liver disease from taking Tylenol than have died from hydroxychloroquine out there. And every person that I know of that has gotten it. And the other part that made no sense was, if you got it, they didn't treat you early. Can you imagine going to the doctor and say, you learned you've got stage 1 cancer, here's some time, go home, take some Tylenol and come back when it's stage 4.
Yeah.
We'll see that's what we did with this. When we know that every disease out there, getting it early is the easiest, quickest way to do it. But we totally ignored that. And we had one of our state reps just dead gum near died.
Yeah.
And I happened to get a phone call that said he needs some help. And so I called and managed to get him in contact with one of the doctors. Later told that he was within 6, but he went back to the hospital. Hardly could walk, talk, and breathe. They took his oxygen content and said, oh, it's 92. You're not sick enough yet. Go home and come back. And we've had that story over and over and over again. And I wrote every hospital in Texas asking them about joining in with Dr. McCullough when he wrote a letter to the FDA asking them to make the drug available And I got no response from any one of the hospitals. I wrote everyone in Texas. I got no response from them. And to this day, they still are very, very few places, hospitals, that will actually treat a patient. They make them comfortable until they die.
Unacceptable.
Oh, it is.
Completely unacceptable. We could talk all day
Yes,
about
we
the
could.
COVID response. You have been such a champion. You've been out there since day one, long before anybody was remotely brave enough to speak out on this issue. We're so thankful for everything that you have done. In closing, can you just tell us how our followers, how our members, those watching who know this upcoming legislative session is happening in 65 days, give or take a few, how can we support you in your efforts, and what do we do to prepare for, I'm assuming COVID is going to take an enormous amount of the legislative session.
I think well, answer that question first. It will take a piece of it. I think the main thing is we've got to fix the emergency orders statute we have that have put us where we are. It was never intended for complete takeover of the state for almost a year. I mean, we will soon be approaching a year of having a monarchy. It was never intended for that. The legislature has been left out completely, 100% left out of anything that's happened in the last 9 months. And there were other panels created, unelected people handpicked by the governor. And it's interesting, there were no real doctors in any of those, in a medical disaster. You know, doing it this way is if we had a hurricane that took out Houston again, and the executive orders went out and told the fire, the police, and the power companies to stand down, let the people take care of the power and the emergency services. And that's what we did with telling our medical folks to stand down.
Yes.
But to answer your question about what can they do, make sure your reps and your senator, the governor's office know that you want the Capitol open, that there's no reason to fear COVID.
Did you hear that? This is incredibly important to me. We need our state capitol open, and your state representative, your state senator need to know that you want the right to go to Austin and advocate as a citizen.
That is right. I mean, the people are our government. Our government is made up of the people. They're just some of us happen to be elected that they kind of pull things together. But it is not a cute saying. We are a government of the people, by the people, because it's for them. It's the only country that ever created a government from the bottom up. Said, we willingly want to put you in charge of taking care of us, providing for what we can't do for ourselves. Not to be in charge of us, but to provide the infrastructure to hold us together in there. And so the people's input is very important. It's important in every one of our hearings. I have yet to be in a hearing when somebody came in and didn't say something that I didn't, that I didn't learn something.
Sure.
Because the people have a vested interest in it. And so they will come in and provide information. And so it is not right, and it is not good for us to try to limit it to remote testimony. I've gone through that. It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible. It's no way to communicate. And we can't do it through a mask. You can't communicate. And that's a whole, we could talk another whole afternoon about that.
Well, I absolutely agree. And we can find you on Facebook, Senator Bob Hall. You have a page on Facebook if you want to follow. Where else can we connect with you to keep up with your efforts?
Have a website, senatorbobhall.com. They put out a regular Capitol Hall report that talks about some of the same stuff we do on Facebook, but between Facebook and senatorbobhall.com.
Wonderful.
And the only one last thing I'm going to say is for our schools, that the parents, you guys need to take charge of those schools and stop putting up with this nonsense that still exists in many of our schools of social distancing and masks.
Yeah.
You need to put an end to it. And until the parents rise up and say, enough is enough, And if the school isn't willing to make the changes so our kids can be in a classroom without a mask on, learning from a teacher in the room there with them, then they're going to be better off putting them someplace where they can. And when that happens, that's going to have a huge impact on the budgets for the schools, and it might make a difference in their attitude towards this. But I've heard too many stories. Our kids are suffering because of these policies of social distancing, masks, and plexiglass separations for little kids who are basically bulletproof in this thing.
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
Well, Senator Hall, thank you so much for being a champion of our children, of our families, for medical freedom, for the doctor-patient relationship. We appreciate you and your lovely wife, Kay. Give her a big hug from us. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all of what you guys do. One of the best organizations we have in Texas.
They are awesome.
Yeah.
Can you look at that one now?